rich man's world. I have turned the soul of this beautiful land, but the beauty.
Welcome to another conversation with My Future Skills, the podcast where we talk with interesting people about what skills we have and what skills we need to have to be present in the future. In this episode, I talked to Adrian Ashton. Adrian recently self-published a book about imposter syndrome after he realized that everything most people think they know about it is actually wrong based on various published research. In his wider ongoing work, Adrian holds international reputations for his training and work with enterprises, charities, universities, policy developers, so of all types. And by the way, he is also the only freelance consultant, as far as we know, in the world, to have annually published an impact report on his own business for nearly 20 years. With that experience in his pocket, we kind of confidently go into a deep discussion about the imposter phenomenon. What is it? How does it manifest? How can we work with it? What is influenced by it? And also, what does it influence? It was really a great conversation about all the underlying things that we should talk about nevertheless, but only seem to be doing when we talk about imposter syndrome. I hope you enjoy the conversation just as much as I did. Here's Adrian on imposters. If you're at a party and somebody asks you, what is it you do all day? What do you answer them?
Well, this is, I have a bit of a cheat answer to this one, Saskia. So a few years ago, I asked this question to lots of the people that I work with and said, how would you introduce me at a party? So part of my own CPD framework is to say, how do other people see me and experience me in different ways? And I think it depends the type of party I'm at. If it's a black tie affair, or if it's just a turn up with a bottle, and it's a barbecue. Generally, though, I would say I help people feel more comfortable and confident about fixing problems in their organization. But I'm not a coach. That sounds like I'm a coach, but it's not. I work with people and organizations to try and help them figure out what they need to know and then help them design the plan, policy, help them draft materials that they need to, or documents, help them identify the people they need to meet so they can go on and do the things they want to do. That's the official kind of businessy introduction stuff, which sounds very vague in general. The reality is in practice, what most people will say is, that's Adrian. He wears a fez to national conferences and keynote addresses. He likes to do magic tricks with people that he's working with. And he uses a lot of play and will help you feel better about yourself in whatever you're doing. And someone actually once described me or introduced me as saying, this is Adrian. He will help you feel less stupid. I love the sentiment of that, but I think it could be a bit upsetting for some people. Say, well, I don't want to admit that I feel stupid at the start. So there's, something there. So I get involved in all sorts of messy stuff, Saskia. So I do help people raise finance through applying to investment. I help people develop new business ideas. I help people review their governance of organizations. I help develop policy in terms of internal policies, like a social media policy, a safeguarding policy, but also policy in terms of future sector requirements. So I'm involved in a research program at the moment in another country that's actually helping that country's government design what will be appropriate interventions and resources and investment to help particular target sectors grow in the future, to help sustain and grow more jobs in those communities. So it's messy, I'm afraid. Most people would go, oh, I'm Adrian. I help people understand their accounts. I can do that. Right. But it sprawls a bit, I'm afraid.
Mm-hmm. I was just thinking, two things. So first is I want to introduce you to a German word, which might help you put all of that under some form of umbrella if you want to. In Germany, we have the word, it's called eierlegende Wollmilchsau. I can write that down to you at some point and send it to you. But basically what it means is you have an animal, and that in that situation, a pig, which also produces wool, lays egg, gives milk. So it's the whole package.
Nice.
So you're kind of the eierlegende Wollmilchsau for whatever people need with your magic wand and your fairs. Is that kind of?
Yes. I loved that analogy, Saskia. So if you can spell it out for me later, I will start to use that in all of my materials about myself in the future.
Most happy. Yeah, we can definitely do that. Which brings me to a conversation that I already had in this podcast with Alex, where we talked a lot about generalists. And I like the art that this is making between the different seasons now. Because we were talking a lot and going really deep into what it is to be a generalist. But what we didn't talk about, or not really, we didn't go deep into that, is how difficult it is sometimes to introduce yourself with that. Because you have that range of things, and you can't just say, I'm an accountant, and people already and instantly know what you're doing. You don't have to go into it, and you don't have to explain yourself too much.
Well, yes and no, Saskia. I think if I say I'm an accountant, that helps that means that the person projects onto me what they understand by an accountant, which is not always the same thing as what an accountant is. So, for example, I run training courses online there's a national body in the UK called Unlimited, who supports social entrepreneurs. And over the last few years, they've asked me to deliver an short online workshop program to help early stage social entrepreneurs understand bookkeeping, help them manage their finances, and help them manage their accounts. And what comes out of those workshops and conversations a lot are people saying, oh, I didn't realize my accountant could support me with this. I didn't know I could ask my accountant about that. I just thought they did this one thing. So there's this kind of education piece that says to help a relationship form quickly, we need eggs, we need descriptors, but we also need some kind of ongoing education and awareness that says, and prompts that say, I'm an accountant. What do you understand by that? What do you think it is that I do if I tell you I'm an accountant? To help clarify that understanding, to build the relationship better.
It comes back to what you said at the beginning. Like sometimes you let other people introduce you, because at that moment they're kind of forced to look into their projections and their expectations of what you said and rethink them. And they're like, well, Adrian's an accountant. What does that mean? What do I want to project off him onto the other person? What do I want to tell about Adrian? What story do I want to tell about him? Yeah, I like that.
And it came about by accident almost, Saskia, many years ago, because I had an idea, which was I need to test my branding. You know, I'm kind of starting out as a freelancer, as a consultant. I need to make sure that what I think I'm telling my clients, what I think I'm projecting, is what's being heard. So I did a short survey. And what came back was everyone said, we like working with you for these reasons. Okay? And in my head, I've been saying, you should work with me for these reasons. So there's a moment of dilemma there, which is, do I then try and re-educate my customers to say, no, you need to understand what it is I do here? Or do I say, well, look, it doesn't matter. I'm still doing this stuff. They're enjoying it in these ways. This is what makes me special. This is what they're noticing. This is what they enjoy. This is what they're talking about. So again, that internal reflection piece to say, a bit of self-reflection, bit of critical thought, and also that sense of identity. Which identity do I want to hold? Do I want to hold the identity that I've made for myself? Or am I now starting to co-create my professional identity, my brand, with my marketplace, with my clients, with my collaborators, to to make it more enjoyable for all of us and easier for all of us along the way as well.
Yeah, there's that difference between what you think you project and what you're actually projecting is an interesting one, because a lot of the times in my perception, when people try to overlap that, what they think they need to do is change their offer to match what the client thinks. When in fact, sometimes it's maybe just sometimes reshaping about how you think of what you do and not necessarily changing what you do.
Yeah, it's the idea of framing.
Mm-hmm.
How have we introduced the subjects? How have we contextualized the idea? So those kind of that breadcrumb trail that says, well, start with this, then we'll add that. So if you're a teacher, it's called scaffolding. You build up the knowledge and the structure and the understanding so you can, works really well. And I remember I came across this concept decades ago. There's a guy called Matthew Taylor that used to be the chief executive of the RSA. I heard him speak one time and he talked about this idea of reframing, and it just really struck with me. And it got me thinking as well about how far can we take this concept of framing to create change for ourselves and other people. And when I became a parent, a couple of, many years, well, not quite many years ago, but in the past, I wanted to try and encourage my kids to have this ability to think critically. To say, how do I push things? How do I work with other people in the best way? How do I understand other people? How do I appreciate the world around me? And one of the rules, the challenges I always gave them to try and build on this was to say, if you can ask me in the right way, I have to increase your pocket money every week. If you can find the right, because it's this idea that questions are really powerful. Questions can create change, can create action if we only frame them in the right way. And then I think there's one time where actually one of my kids, they did it as a one-off. There was something particular they wanted some extra cash. And so they came to me and they said, you know how you're always telling us that if we find the right way to ask you? And I thought, okay, here we go. Let's see if they get it, if they can do it this time. And they pulled it off. And they got 50 quid out of me as a one-off hit, just to reassure this was not like it bankrupted me. But they said, because of this, and you said that, and you say this, and we know that, and we talked about that, and now I want to do this, then I need 50 quid. And I couldn't argue with the framing because they'd actually pulled out that argument and said, so the question at the end was almost inconsequential. It wasn't a yes, no question. It was just, I now need this money. Will you give it to me? And I had to say yes, because they'd found a way to frame the question, to introduce it. That pulled on the context, the history, the drivers, the motivations from all of us. That I had to say yes. If I didn't, then I would have completely said, you can now not trust anything I tell you, because all of that is based on what I say is important, my actions over the last decades, and the models of behavior that I try and adopt and encourage you to adopt too. So for any parents listening, it's a two-edged sword. Your kids will become better thinkers and ability, but you may be a bit out of pocket as a result. Sorry.
At some point. Is there one question, like for you personally, the ultimate question that you've heard somewhere and that you think about more often, or that comes back into your head that you always ask because you liked it? Like, is there one favorite question?
So there is a question that I came across from a television show called The Prisoner, created by Patrick McGowan. It was created in the 1960s, but all of the themes within it are probably more prevalent today than they were then. And it's a beautifully colorful, crazy, abstract. You can be whatever you want. You can take whatever you want from that show. But there's one episode called The General, where the prisoner kind of cornered and says, okay, you get upset. He says, okay, and he's trapped by a supercomputer. And he says, I can beat the supercomputer. If I can beat the supercomputer, you have to not shoot. Okay, the idea of frame. So he said, okay, I'm going to ask the supercomputer a question. And if he can't answer my question, then I've beaten it, right? And he goes, yeah, great. Thinking this is a supercomputer, no way. And his question, he puts in is why? Question mark. That's it. And the computer, of course, just can't answer it. And it's that kind of idea. I think Douglas Adams, the writer, built on that in his Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, with the answer to life, the universe, and everything is 42. And and his argument in the characters from the book was the answer is 42. It's not my fault you've asked the one question, which gets to this idea about saying actually answers are there. Sometimes we get the answer before the question. And questions help us make more sense of things. So my kind of thing that I've come across, and it's from an advert years ago, Saskia, and I think it was for a car manufacturer or something. And the gist of the advert was the most commonly used phrase in the English language is okay. So they said in the end, it's probably not. But at that time, that's okay. Let's just carry on with it. And we accept so much because it's okay. We're used to it. It's fine. And the question this advert posed was, what if the most commonly used phrase in the English language was instead, why not? Why can't we do it this way? What if we changed it to that? And that question for me has always been that driving force. What if? Why not? Why don't, when you invited me, when we connected on LinkedIn because we were both at a conference that we kind of had a random networking serendipitous moment in. And then you thought, okay, we had a chat afterwards and on Zoom. And then you thought, oh, maybe I could ask him to come on my podcast series. Why don't I ask him? And I get the invitation and say, well, why not? Let's just see where it goes. Why don't we try more things out? Try more experiments. Do less of the planning and thinking. Just do more experiments. Let's just try stuff out. See what happens. So that's my
Why
big
is such a powerful question? It's well,
why not?
yeah. There's that concept. I think it comes from the coaching where you ask why 5 times to actually get to the root of something.
Yes,
and there's a reason why that works.
there's a comedy, well, comedy in the loosest way. There's a bunch of people in America, a bunch of comedians and actors. They came together years ago under the group title of VOOZA, VOOZA. And as VOOZA, they produced these short little kind of video clips poking fun the high-tech Silicon Valley startup community. Okay? That's just some really fun stuff. And one of them was they did a take on the 5 whys. So this whole thing about, having this problem with our servers keep crashing and this, that, and the other. And said, okay, well, let's use the 5 whys to figure it out between us, between the engineer and the head of the company, as it were. So they went through the 5 whys, and the 5 whys ended up with, because the head of the company is an idiot. So it's that great thing of questions are great. Don't ask them if you're not prepared to be upset by the answer. I think that's the thing. Maybe it's questions, we always have to have a health warning on them. You're going to ask a question, be prepared to be upset by the answer. If you don't want to be upset or challenged, don't ask.
And we talked about that in one of the chats we had before, as you mentioned. You told me the story about that social media guideline. That is like, I don't know, 7 pages long forever. And nobody can actually think of or remember that. And I think both of them basically come down to the same root. Make it as simple as possible, break it down as much as possible, and you'll get a thing where you can actually start to change something. On the one hand, because people finally admit what's the real problem here. On the other hand, because people finally can remember it.
People can relate to it.
Mm-hmm.
People can make it personal for themselves. Very often we say, oh, that's too abstract. In workplaces, people go, oh, that's not my job. That's someone else's job. That's, someone else's problem to fix. Actually, if you all took a bit more autonomy and said, well, what if I had a go doing that? Why don't I just try it and see what happens? I'm not trying to undermine that person. I'm just thinking, I know that they're a bit overwhelmed at the moment. I think I can have a go at this. So why don't I have a go at it?
Right.
Because we don't ask those questions of ourselves, the risk is that we stagnate. I think, Saskia. And I think that to me is a horrible realization that someone has allowed their lives to stagnate and they've not achieved their potential. And that's sad for them in terms of, they've missed out on things that they could have done otherwise. And that kind of one of the ideas that ties to the stuff about imposter syndrome, that you're missing out on stuff. It's a life half lived otherwise. But then because you're not being more, doing more, then that means you're denying other people. Because you're not going out and doing things, you're not interacting with those other people and enriching their lives. So actually, because you are choosing not to try something, to have a go, to try and change something, however small, you are diminishing the world at large for it. And that to me is a kind of a sad place to be. I have had this idea. So one of my kind of ambitions in life, always kind of half jokingly says, what's my ambition for life? And I say to get to the end of it and to look back with as fewer regrets as possible and a smaller body count as possible. So I want to try and avoid doing things in a way that will leave blood on the carpet. But at the same time, not going, oh, what if I tried this? If only I'd done that, how different might things have been? And I think it's only when you get to a certain age or you've had certain experiences, perhaps, that you get that realization of saying, yeah, I need to. So, get experience. I always say to my kids as they're getting older now, just go and try stuff out. It doesn't matter if you get it wrong, as long as you don't kill someone in the process, it can be recovered from. And even then, if you keep quiet about it, you might get away with it. So you carry on. Just keep pushing yourself, keep trying stuff. It can be exciting to realize, oh, I can do that after all. And that just gives us more of a buzz, and that inspires and encourages other people. And like I said, that makes the world better for all of us.
You just quickly touched on the word imposter. And, well, you wrote a book about it, so you know.
As if on cue. Yes, so so go and ask.
How would you how would you describe impostering, imposter syndrome, all of it? What is that for you?
Okay, well, I think again, it depends who you ask. Lots of people have different visual definitions. For me, the idea of imposter syndrome, imposter phenomenon, as it was actually initially called before it was subverted, imposterism is all about the sense that the voice in your head saying you're not good enough. If you do that, it's going to go wrong. You're going to look silly. People are going to laugh at you. And to me, that goes, okay, I hear that voice all the time. So I listen to it. You're going to look silly. People will laugh at you. And then my next question is, so what? Because 50 years from now, no one will even remember my name or what I did or who I was. So it won't matter if they laughed at me or not today. Just so what? And that sense of facing and embracing your mortality is quite liberating in some ways, to say, actually, it doesn't matter if it goes wrong. It doesn't matter if I'm not qualified. But I think as a society, as a culture, we build these expectations of professionalism and knowledge and skills that we're supposed to have. And sometimes we find ourselves in environments, at parties, with other people, interacting with other people. And we compare ourselves. It's a natural thing. We're trying to build a sense of, who are you? Who am I? How do I build a relationship with you? How do I interact with you? We compare ourselves to each other. Just, it's part of nature. And in that comparing, we suddenly go, oh, you know much more about that than I do, or you seem to know more about that. Goes back to the idea about accountants we were saying earlier. I've projected onto you my thought about how knowledgeable you are because of your job title. For example, I have a doctorate. I don't tend to advertise that a lot or list it in places because I think it's a dangerous thing. Because if I went over and go, I'm Dr. Adrian Ashton, people would, and it's not a medical, just to, if anyone see, it's not a medical doctorate. Yes. I can't, do heart surgery or anything like that. But it's that sense of people will suddenly go, oh, he suddenly knows a lot more. And they will change their behavior as a result. And that impacts upon the kinds of relationships we could best have together, because then we put artificial things in place. We put these kind of constructs in, which limits the flexibility and the space we have to play together. Because we think, oh, you must be so professional, can't possibly play or joke about. No, why not? You work it that way. But that sense of, imposterism is that feeling you have of that nagging sense of, when I try and understand myself in comparison to someone else, it just doesn't quite, I don't feel up to the same standards. I feel weaker, I feel lesser, and therefore I feel I've devalued myself. I don't have, and I lose the confidence to actually go out and have a go and work it that way.
What you just described is interesting. Because how we mostly talk about imposter syndrome is, yes, that feeling of not being enough, of not being able to perform enough, to not be enough in a comparison with somebody else. At the same time, we mostly attribute it to, for example, women or marginalized groups like people of color. And I heard of an interesting study recently where they basically ran the test on who is more prevalent to experience imposter syndrome. And what they found out, I'd have to see if I find the study to link in the show notes, but what they found out is there isn't necessarily a difference in who experiences imposter syndrome within an age group. It doesn't matter if you're black, white, female, male, neurotypical, neurodiverse, whatever. We all kind of experience the same levels of imposter syndrome when we're in the same age group. However, the older you get, the less, can you say, impaired
Yeah.
or hindered by imposter syndrome you feel, the less you voice that you suffer from or experience phases of imposter syndrome.
Yeah, I think there's a few things within that Saskia to pull out in no particular order. The age one is interesting. I think that links back to my earlier idea about mortality. When you get to a certain stage in your life and you start to say, there are fewer Christmases ahead of me than there are behind me, you suddenly go, I'm going to take more risks. It doesn't matter now. What have I got to lose? I can be emboldened by that. It doesn't matter if I upset you. It's fine. So what? So there's that kind of sense of, screw you, world. I'm going to go out and enjoy myself with it as much as possible. So certainly as we get older, there's that sense of we care less what other people think about us as a general rule. So I think that there's something definitely in that. I think that point as well about it affecting everyone equally, everyone being is equally as likely. Absolutely. So part of the back of the book is a bibliography. There's find the right page. There's a kind of thank you notes, and there's a bibliography, loads of referencing as well to studies, things that I came across. And that says as well, regardless of your gender, your age, your orientation, your ethnicity, however you identify yourself, you are equally as likely at some point in your life to feel like an imposter in some second. There is, however, perception generally that it usually only affects women. It affects women more, particularly women in management or leadership. Now, I kind of was struck by this. So how do we reconcile this thing? For all the studies are saying it's everyone, but everyone says it's only women. Why is this? Where's this come from? And where it's come from, Saskia, is I started digging into this. Most of the stuff that's written about imposter syndrome is written by women for women. Most of the panels you see are filled by women talking about their experiences. But that's okay, but it reinforces that stereotype, that gender thing. So again, I dig back further to the original study that imposter phenomenon, imposter syndrome, was first labeled and developed. And there's a study in America led by two women who interviewed a bunch of women only, who all self-identified as having strong feelings of self-doubt. No control group. No. So actually, if you look at the design of the research, really hokey, but it caught people's imagination. It validated, people took it as a way to, this validates my idea, my concerns, and it sprawled from there. But it's something that if we go further back, in the book I reference, I actually quote Albert Einstein. And Albert Einstein gave an interview once that I came across where he said something. If you read that, that's a classic definition of someone saying they are suffering imposter syndrome. But this was 30, 40, 50 years before it was discovered in this study. So we have this whole thing of saying we have, societal, cultural norms pushes us in certain routes, how we're supposed to behave. As a man, I'm supposed to be resilient. I'm not supposed to feel weak. I'm not supposed to feel overly emotional because that's what society tells me. To which I go, well, screw you, society. I will cry if I want to. I will do it and all the rest. But only as I've gotten older do I feel confident and able to do that. So there's certainly something about trying to break down some of those misconceptions about that. And again, you talked about ethnicities as well. One of as I went through the researches and had different conversations, one of the things that comes out as one of the contributors, one of the triggers that makes people start to self-doubt and reinforces that thought pattern in their heads is a lack of role models. So that sense of, so particularly for women, again, we connect some of these bits together. The study in the 1970s led, about women. So all of a sudden women are saying, I'm feeling more down and all the rest. What else was happening around that time? Well, it's the initial kind of next wave of feminism from the 60s. Workplaces are opening up. The glass ceiling is starting to be lifted a little bit. Women are suddenly getting the opportunity to take on management roles in companies in a way that they haven't had before. So they don't see any of their peers ahead of them. So they've got no reference point to say, am I doing this in an okay way or not? The same with ethnicity as well. How many leaders of color do we see in common workplaces? So, we have a prime minister of color in Britain at the moment, but actually he's not that great peer role model for many other people of color, because when people look at him, they go, well, actually, he has massive personal, private, independent health. He seems to be out of touch with my community. So we need role models, not just who look like us and sound like us, but we can personally relate to, and they feel it works. So there's something about leadership as well, that as we go ahead, we need to be having conversations that say to our wider community of identity, hey, I'm a bit further ahead on this road. And you know what? I'm scared too, but it seems to be okay. The path seems to be firming up. You can all follow in now. Let's kind of go for it. But this idea that we're not supposed to say those things because we are professional. We're not supposed to kind of, like I said, kids in the playground. Is it safe to go in that corner? It looks a bit muddy. Yeah, I've had a go. It's not that deep. We can all go and splash the puddles together. It's great. We do it as kids in the playground. Why don't we do it once we're adults? So this idea of play and just trying to be more childlike. I always kind of say to you, be more like a 6-year-old. You know, you'll have more fun. You'll cause upset quickly, but you'll also get over it more quickly. You know, you upset someone. Well, if you are 6 years old with your mates in the playground and you do something that upsets your mate goes, "Oh, that's rubbish. That hurts. I'm going to cry now." And you go, "I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. Can we still be friends?" And then your mate goes, "Yeah, of course we can." And it's done. It's resolved. We move on. As adults, we have these weird dances that we built, these constructs. So yeah, be more childlike. Pretend we're in the playground. And this sense of, just because, like say, an imposter, just because we don't see anyone ahead of us that we can identify with, doesn't mean we can't do it ourselves. We need mold breakers, and that's why they're called mold breakers and trailblazers. Someone just pokes ahead a bit first and says, "What if? Why not?" And then shares the story back with other people.
The story that you mentioned at the beginning kind of sounds like the perfect recipe for self-fulfilling prophecy. Somebody says, this is how we're supposed to be, or a study says this is how, in this case, women are. And we keep focusing on it. You're completely right there. Saying, like, there are panels about that topic, basically all filled with women speakers. Articles written for women by women. So it is that self-fulfilling prophecy of, well, who am I as a woman if I'm not at some point in my life experiencing some form of imposter syndrome?
Because everyone tells me I'm supposed to.
Exactly.
Yeah, we have to kind of break that narrative. And the way that I kind of approach it, Saskia, in the book, or where the book came from, was me doing some research and finding all this evidence that said it's all bull. Everything everyone's saying about imposter syndrome is complete tosh. So yeah, which again gets me thinking about other things. So, for example, there is another thing called the 10,000 hours. You know, to become an expert in something, it takes 10,000 hours. That's complete codswallop. Rubbish. It's a lie. It's a fallacy. It's untrue. It's based on an interview that a music teacher once gave, where he was put on the spot by the interviewer, flustered an answer, and then very quickly said, "Yeah, but that's probably not true, actually, because there's too many other variables." But it got written up in the interview without that caveat, which meant this idea just spread. Learning styles, psychometrics, 10,000 steps, 5 fruit and vegetables a day. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day, is not true. You know, when you go back and you look at their history, where did that come from? Why do we believe it? What did the studies say? Where did those studies come from? How were they done? It all falls apart. As a society, we build models. How would you introduce yourself at a party? I'm an accountant. Oh, I understand an accountant to mean this. It's a shortcut. It allows me to quickly build a bridge, build a connection, move on. As a society, we have so much fragmentation, so much plurality, so much diversity. We're having to increasingly build shortcuts in our thinking. Well, I'll use my understanding of this. Everyone says it's that, so that'll do, because I don't feel I have time to go and work it out for myself. So I'll buy in and I'll accept that thing. Everyone else seems to say that's what it is, so it's probably okay. But then we always remember, for many of us, we remember our parents saying to us, if everyone else jumped off a cliff, would you follow them? Well, no, obviously not. Well, same principle, just pause sometimes and say, figure it out for yourself. And that's my deal with the book. And the arguments I'm making, Saskia, and anyone who gives me a platform, is I'm not telling you I'm right and you're wrong. I'm presenting my workings out to say, this is what I found. This is how I think what it shows us, how it challenges our understanding, and in turn, what that might mean for the sorts of lives we can have, which would be better for ourselves and for other people, if we just pause and think forwards. Because again, that sense of creating change, this idea of imposter syndrome as well, like I said, the original study in the 1970s did not call it imposter syndrome. They called it imposter phenomenon. This industry emerged around it of coaches, trainers, psychiatrists, psychologists, who relabeled it, who medicalized it, syndrome, to legitimize their work, their services. If it's a syndrome, it's an illness. You must pay to receive a treatment. Okay, that's how we think in society. The other thing that kind of scared me, and it does scare me, Saskia, about imposter syndrome, the one thing that kind of really does get me, and I always make a point of this, when I was going around and doing this, and again, the reason I kind of push this out is in hopes that somebody will say, actually, no, you're wrong. There's this research over here that you haven't come across yet. And they can show it to me and I go, right, I'll do a second edition and I'll fix it. No problem. Prove me wrong. My concern is this, that all of the practices, all of the techniques that are advocated to help you manage, to banish the imposter syndrome, you do this, you do that, all of these things, I have not yet been able to find any research or study that tests the efficacy of them or the safety of them. Now, to me, Saskia, that is the equivalent of saying, I'm going to go to the doctor and say, doctor, my leg hurts. And the doctor doesn't ask me anything about, well, what were you doing to make it hurt? In what ways does it hurt? How is it impinging on your life because it hurts? They simply go, here's a bottle of pills. They haven't been tested. We don't know if there's any side effects. They could even kill you. But this is what we give people if they've got a hurting leg. Would you be happy to do that with your doctor? Of course not. So why do we accept the same when we're kind of working with this? And one of the things that has come out as well is this idea that self-doubt is just like your leg will hurt for different reasons. And the root cause will be different. And so the approach needs to be different. The feelings of self-doubt are rooted in different things as well. So that important thing of saying, and doubt can be a powerful ally, actually. But feeling self-doubt is actually a good thing. It makes you stronger. It makes you more successful. It keeps you safer. So don't get rid of it. Embrace it. But work with it. Understand it so you can get the most from it in terms of helping you fulfill your potential and be all the Saskia you can be all the Adrian you can be all the listener, whatever your name is, you can be as well.
Just when you were talking, there was one point that was jumping in my head, because we do tend to talk about the imposter syndrome or phenomenon as that thing that blocks us from achieving something. And let's stay with the stereotypes for now. I'm going to resolve that in a second. We say women have more or suffer more from imposter syndrome. At the same time, they are better leaders from a soft skills aspect. So what jumped into my head is, and maybe we can resolve that maybe with renaming it. So the question that jumped into my head is imposter, being an imposter, feeling as an imposter, really such a bad thing? If you look at it from a standpoint of self-regulation and actually asking the question, am I really that good? Am I really qualified for that? Should I really do that? Not in the crippling effect of putting yourself down every time, but as a regulation about how we as a society, as human beings in a form of co-living, react to each other, interact with each other, and thrive together.
Definitely, I think so. There's two things that branch off that idea, Saskia. Well, many things I think actually. One is, I think, or have an idea, imposter syndrome seems to affect women more because women are more open about talking about it. Again, society norms. As a man, society says to me, you're not talk up or openly about your emotions or feelings. I'm not encouraged to. Societal norms do not really encourage me in the same way that they do for women. Okay? I kind of rail against that where I can. I think there's also something about how, I thought I should have written some notes down as we were talking to prompt this. women and leadership. And that, yes, so there's something else as well that says about how if we take the feeling of self-doubt, the imposterism, we harness it and we link it and we say, well, there's this next step to it. Many people go, oh, I don't feel good enough to do this, so I won't do it. Walk away, close the door, hang the phone up. What if though we said, I don't feel good enough to do this? And then we have a loop, kind of a double loop learning that says, why don't I feel good enough? And then the triple loop becomes, what do I need to help me feel good enough? And that then starts to become that interaction with each other that says, who can I go to ask for support on this? What training might I need? What experience could I get that would help me feel better able to do this? So it just becomes a hard stop. I don't feel good enough. That's it. Can't do it. But we need people, coaches, line managers, mentors, family members, friends, when we share that idea, to say, well, instead of going, oh, that's awful, just showing sympathy. Oh, that's awful, poor you. I get that as well. Laugh it off and move on. And we stayed in that moment with that person and said, what do you need? What would stop you feeling less of an imposter to be able to do this? What experience do you need? Who do you need to have a conversation with? What training do you need? What book do you need to read? That was suddenly unlock a growth opportunity for us. And if we was, so instead of this, the labels we use, the language we use. Do you want to feel like an imposter? Or, if you do this, you're going to feel like an imposter. Or if you do this, it's an incredible opportunity for you to develop new skills and grow as a person. One of those sounds quite appealing. Why would you, the framing, how we frame it, this is an opportunity to do something more, become a more, develop, be more exciting, shinier, fluffier, sexier even, or you can just stay there in the corner and just cry about it and miss out. Which would you rather do? For that one question, again, what if, why not? What's stopping you trying it? Why do you feel like that? Simple, short questions that unlock that reflection, critical thinking that help us move on through it. So there's that part. So, but I think that it's that regulation, it's difficult to balance it. So there's something as well that I came across, I've written about in the book called the Dunning-Kruger effect. The Dunning-Kruger effect is this sense of, it's the kind of balancing mechanism. Dunning-Kruger says, you need to not be overconfident. So, for example, the Dunning-Kruger effect would say, I'm overconfident. I've never gone mountain climbing before, but I think I'm going to climb Everest with some toothpicks and a spare pair of socks because I know I can do it. I'm ambitious. I'm resilient. I can be creative. I'm a problem solver. That's all I need. Let me go, get off, Bear Grylls style. Now, however glamorous and exciting the headlines would be, man climbs Everest with toothpicks and a pair of socks. That would be fantastic. It's not going to happen.
Chances are you'd rather sign up for the Darwin Award than for the Dunning-Kruger effect.
But so we need a regulate. We need to the evolutionary part of our brain that says, "Whoa, there, boy, just sense check yourself. Is this really that good an idea? It may be. It's going to be really cool at the end of it, but are you going to be able to get to the end of it safe?" The most famous story about the Dunning-Kruger effect, kind of reference in the book as well, is a bank robber who read, someone who once read lemon juice can be used as invisible ink. So in their mind, they said, okay, so lemon juice turns things invisible. So they covered themselves in lemon juice, thought they were invisible and went to rob a bank and got very confused and upset when the officers stopped them midway through. Said, but you can't see me, I'm invisible. So you kind of have this thing going, new places, new environments we go into are scary because we don't have a personal frame of reference to give us that confidence and ability. So we have to get the balance right between being a bit bolshy, being a little bit arrogant perhaps, but also having a bit of doubt in our head to say, let me just sense check this. What else might I need just to make sure I've checked with someone else first? I've read I've had a second opinion. I've watched someone else's YouTube video on this. I've read the reviews on TikTok first. You don't just jump into it as a brand new thing and expect that's going to work perfectly first. And I think, but as women, I think there is this is an awful generalization. Women are generally more emotional in their thinking than men, because again, of how society tells us we have to be, in those messages we get when we're younger and growing up, and that are reinforced. So as a result, women are more likely to be open and sympathetic and empathetic. Whereas as men, we tend to go, just power through, fix it, go. There's a very famous kind of quote from a British television guy, a presenter called Jeremy Clarkson, and from the original Top Gear and then the Grand Tour. And his response to any problem when you were driving a car was, give it more power. Power, put your foot down, power through. Just keep going regardless, and it will somehow fix itself out at the other end. Anyone who's ever seen the show, you've now got Jeremy Clarkson in your head doing donuts or something. That's fine. I'm sorry. Enjoy it. It will pass. But there's something about, as men, we're encouraged, just keep pushing through. We're not encouraged to sit and reflect. So we don't have those tools, those peers, those encouragements, those models, those frames to do it in the way that we feel we can. And if we don't feel we're encouraged to do something, then we probably won't. We don't feel it's safe to do it. We talk, I do lots of training courses. I'm recently been asked to write a guide for a national body to say, for their online trainers, to say, how do they make sure that when they're kind of inducting and bringing in trainers to deliver on workshops, that those trainers create psychologically safe spaces for their learners. Because apparently they say that they've observed me doing it, and they say, you do it really well. So they will kind of empty it out of my head and put it in a checklist for people. But there's something about, if we feel safe to try something, we're more likely to do it. So that sense of, what do we need to feel safe to try that? And like I said, we need to look at it. We need to find role models. We need to see other people who've talked about how they're doing it and expressing it, in order for us to feel comfortable and confident. Oh, it's not just me. Everyone else is doing it, so that's okay for me. The herd mentality goes back to our history as a species. We got to where we are today in the grand scheme of history because we had a tribe. We stuck together. We all acted together. We did things similarly to each other to stave off the wolves, the cold, the hunger. Society's given us a bit more stability now. We've got more choice, freedom. But we've still got that evolutionary layer in our head that takes a bit longer to quiet down, to say, well, I need the reassurance that my rest of my tribe are doing something the same. And then I feel like I'm joining.
There's an element of permission in all of those things you just said, and that basically boil up to where we are. The permission as a boy to go into your emotions, as a girl to actually just go through and not socialize, but go off into the woods and have your adventures. The same with the policing of society. And maybe I was just wondering if that permission or how strong that permission part is one of the root causes of imposter, especially if you look into like women in leadership positions. Am I allowed to do that? Am I allowed to show that as a woman in the workplace?
It's that kind of, it's the assurance piece. Is this safe enough for me to do? Is it safe? It kind of comes from, am I allowed to do this? If I'm allowed to do it, then it must be safe. So we need more explicit feedback loops that say to those people around us. So for example, for anyone listening, if you're line managed or anything else, and your boss does something really well, how often do you say to your boss, you know what, boss, that was a really great thing you did there. I'm not, it was a bit risky for us as a company, but I'm glad you did it like that. And it's worked out really well. You had our back, we've got your back. Thank you very much. And do we do that? We don't, because we assume it's that kind of hierarchy, those that chain of command only flows one way. If, however, we gave more feedback loops to the people around us, unprompted, unscripted, outside of the you do this, they do that, then how much more would we unlock in terms of our confidence, our mutual support for each other to keep pushing things further, to keep doing and being more, and to enjoy working together more as well. I was asked to lead a conversation last year with leaders of community businesses around this theme of imposter syndrome, because actually what kind of came out through exploring it with some people in conversations is if someone in a small organization, particularly towards the apex of it, in terms of senior management roles, if they suffer with self-doubt, then actually the whole organization becomes afflicted by it. Because generally speaking, societal, cultural norms, we look upwards. We look to our leaders to say, how should we behave? There's an argument that says during the global coronavirus pandemic here in England, part of the reason we got into such a mess with it was we looked to our leaders in government as how they behaved through it and mimicked that. Some might say that. I'm not sure that's my place.
Well,
We'll
that's
see
having
what lawyers say afterwards. But yeah, there's something really interesting in that says, how we give that feedback, how we give ourselves permission. So it's not a case of saying the more we progress and grow into those new spaces, people are going to give us permission, because there aren't people ahead of us, above us, to do that we can easily identify. We need permission from our tribe. We need that encouragement. We give ourselves permission, and we feel we can give ourselves permission because it's safe to do so. And it's safe to do so because we've got that positive reinforcement going on around us from other people saying, you know what, you do it that way, that works really well. Or, yeah, we got through it that way, but it was a bit squeaky bum moment at times. So if we can avoid that, that'd be great. We need these times of reflection together opening. We don't often get them. I think there's some, so for example, any project that I'm involved in delivering with a client, or if I become part of a team, in collective, there's a few of us working from different freelancers coming together. I will always try and design in a space at the end of that project, once it's successfully delivered to the client. Let me rephrase that. Once it's completed with the client, success means different things. I will say to them, we need to book in a call together just to reflect on how did we all work together? What did we enjoy about working with each other? What do we think, if we could go back, we should have said to each other sooner, to get that feedback loop so we can become more confident in our abilities and skills? Because that gives us the permission to say to each other, hey, that was really great. I really enjoyed that. But why didn't you tell me that at the time? Well, it's not something we'd normally do in that relationship. Okay, so we'll create that space to put it in. We talked about play earlier. One of the great things that I think, so I'm getting more and more involved with the Lego Serious Play methodology. One of the great things about that is it creates opportunities for people to actually have more human and open conversations with their colleagues as fellow human people. To say, I really liked it when you did this. I'm really impressed when you do it that way. I've often wondered why you're not doing this, because I'm doing that, they're doing that, and surely you should come in there. Because we've created a different space. We've changed the rules. Yeah. This idea of rules as well, I think, Saskia, is really important, because as a society sets rules. Society has laws. And I always say to people, what are those laws based on? If you always got some clever Tom who goes, oh yes, it's the Old Testament scriptures that we can trace back all of the root cause of modern legislation. Well, okay. Generally speaking, though, laws are a reflection of what we as a body of people in a society say is important to us. We get to decide what they should be, how the rules should work. And I use the example with people to say slavery, for example, bonded labor, people in chains on ships going around. In England, slavery was not only legal, but ethically and encouraged and respected business to be in, at the same time as we have modern charity law and modern company law. So it's not that long ago. So what changed? We as a society, we as a body of people started to say, we think we should change some of these rules about how we treat other different types of people within us. And enough people started saying, And because some people said it, other people became more confident. So if they're saying it, I can say that too now. And it starts to spread. And that's my idea, that if enough of us just start to say, this idea of leadership is not about being the head of an organization. Leadership is about creating change for the better of everyone.
Right.
And it's about modeling a behavior that encourages and inspires other people to say, maybe I could do something similar as well. What if, why not? Because I've got the confidence. I feel I have permission because that person's done it. So I feel I can do it now as well. And I think your series, these conversations, your podcast series, Saskia, are a really important channel to keep permeating and propagating and furthering those opportunities for more leadership moments, for more change to happen, for people to hear things in these episodes and go, oh yeah, I thought that was just me thinking that. Actually, maybe I can try that. And I never thought I could, but now I've heard Bob say that or Sue say that. Creates these ripples that we have no idea what they're going to see or not. They may come back to us. They may not. They may not happen for another generation.
Right.
But we know what's important to us. We've at least had a go. We've had a go. So when we get to the end of our time on this planet, we're not going to think, oh, I really should have done something a bit different. I really should have tried. I could have taken that chance.
There is an element of who's responsible for change, and who's responsible, who gives permission, two levels. And you're pointing to yourself, which I totally agree, because it is that feedback loop. And that just popped up when you started talking about loss, because just a bit of background, the conference that we two met each other was about what's the role in companies about creating long-lasting change? What can companies do? What are companies basically required to do? And what are they able to do? What are they empowered to do? Which we tend to not look at. Because we're so, especially in company speech, so to say, we're always focused on those short-term goals. But our quarterly numbers, how much can we pay our stakeholders, all of those things. But when you look at the crises that we're facing, climate change just being one of them and probably the most pertinent at the moment, but there are little other fires around us. So we somehow have to solve, or in that case, get rid of, because otherwise they're going to burn down the whole house. And companies tend to speak in no, sorry, we can't do anything, because if we don't have the stakeholders, then we don't have any more money, and then we can't do any long-lasting change, or other variations of that. So if we as company owners start to give ourselves permission to not look into the short-term, and there's actually a good book from the former, I think he was the CEO of Unilever, Net Positive, who talks about exactly that, how you as a company owner can take the responsibility and can give yourself permission to look into that. And if you then manage to convince other companies around you to do the same and not look at the short term, then you have a power suddenly in the whole game. You have a power in the discussion. And this is when laws get changed. Laws got changed for the last, I don't know, let's say 50 years or something, that we tend to look into turbo and new capitalism. Laws got changed in favor of short-term company goals. So how about we reverse that and use the power as company owners to reverse that and look at the long term? And that's exactly that, having the feedback loop. Talk about it with each other, say what works for you and what doesn't work, give yourself permission to think about that, give yourself permission to look into that, and maybe start with a little bit of doubt to say, like, hey, is it actually cool what we're doing here right now? Putting all that together, and suddenly you have a power there that can change that collective mind about how we think about stuff.
Yeah. But it feels we can't do that because we look out of the window. We go, oh, but there's all those other businesses.
Mm-hmm.
What difference will it make if I do that? Well, today, none. Tomorrow, none. This year, none. But your life runs for more than your next quarter. Your business should have a future beyond the end of this financial year. So there's something, there's an adage that we manage what we measure. And so many businesses, I've got caught up with this quarterly reports, shareholder return. What if we just put an extra number on those accounts or those balance sheets? Just one number, something like that. And all of a sudden people go, oh yeah. So I have a conversation sometimes with companies, charities, social enterprises that I'm working with who are looking to raise social investment. Now, one of the questions I have them is we do a review of where their businesses are at, where their accounts are at. And there's something interesting. I always look at their balance sheets and I say, where is your intellectual property? Like, what do you mean intellectual property? And I say, well, as a business, most businesses, you are trading on the knowledge you have, on the skills of your people, on the relationships you have with suppliers, partners, and customers. That has a value. You've built that up over time. What's that worth? What's the point of putting that on there? Because we manage what we measure. So if you've got a figure on our balance sheet, remember, in the UK, we don't tax wealth. It's profit, not wealth. So if it's on the balance sheet, it's wealth. So it won't get taxed. But then all of a sudden, there's a figure that says each year that figure's going to get up or down. Shareholders, managers, other stakeholders are going to say, oh, our bottom line's going up or down. What are we doing to manage that figure? What are these figures based on? Our relationships with our people, our relationships with our community, our knowledge, our skills, our confidence, our competence. How are we reinvesting in those to make those changes? One small change, and it suddenly opens this cascade of this this idea of if you find the right thing to start with, something small and simple and innocuous and innocent. Everyone, why should anyone have a problem putting that on? Can't see why not. But it's a subterfuge because all of a sudden, through the back of that gives us an in to start all this other stuff spreading out and that change starting to happen.
And I would even encourage people to rethink their relationship with numbers. Why does it why does it need a number to be managed? Because there's another version of saying what you just said. What gets measured gets managed. What can't be measured will bite you in the ass. Because at some point it will come back to you if you don't measure it. If you can't, some things you just can't measure because we don't have the means to measure it. We don't have the abilities to measure it. Why some things just can't be expressed in numbers and really give you a real or an accurate picture of what's actually going on. And if you just don't look at that because there's no number on it, that will come back at you sooner or later.
So maybe it's about
how can we?
It's narrative. So, for example, in any set of accounts, there will be notes at the back. Most companies don't really use them. When I'm doing due diligence or the first review for an investor or grant making body, I always look in the notes. So this is the workings out behind the numbers. This is the story, the narrative, the stuff that they can't easily sometimes put into a straight number. And it always prompts a load of questions because so few companies use them, but actually those that do, it raises stuff out. So for example, I say, well, you kind of put a note in here saying that your overheads this year, your fixed costs your administrative costs were down. And I've dug into the notes and it shows that it's down because you halved your training budget. Why did you halve your training budget and what impact has that had on your people and ability to deliver? And then, no one's ever asked us that. So again, it goes back to, we're back with our accountants again at the start of this comment. Everything's about accountants, isn't it? If an accountant said, when they're preparing your accounts, let's just give you some more prompts. Let's create that. Again, we'll change the framework that we use. In those notes, we'll have a couple of extra note prompts. And all of a sudden, it starts that thinking process. It starts those reflections. It starts those conversations. about, maybe we should rethink the way that we're approaching this. Maybe we should do this, do that. But there's also, I think, Saskia, something about these rules that we have and these laws in place about enforcement. So, for example, for the last 10, 20 years now, in the UK, company law, any limited company of any type, has been, the directors are bound by law to act in terms of corporate social responsibility, or ESG now. Because company law, 10, 20 years ago, company law got changed and said company directors must have regard, give account to how their decision-making has been influenced by the relationships with staff, suppliers, customers, the impact on the community, the impact on the environment. All of these things we've been talking about. That's company law. You have to do that. But there's no enforcement mechanism on the other end. Nowhere in any company account format are you asked to show how have you done that. So if we're not measuring it, if we're not asked to report on it, we're not going to do it. It's the same thing. People go, oh yeah, but that's kind of a bit abstract. Okay, what about people who drive? Okay, we have speed limits, right? Whichever road we're on, there is a speed limit. Great. How do we make sure people stick to the speed limit? Well, we put speed cameras up. So we slow down to the speed limit when we get the speed camera. Do we still always stick to the speed limit when there isn't a speed camera? Parking. Really trouble getting in and out of this road. People are parked on the double yellow lines everywhere. We have a rule. Don't park on the double yellow lines. They're there for a reason. But they're not enforced. There's no traffic wardens ticketing people, fining them to say, you broke the rule. We have the rule for a reason, to encourage your behavior, to make it safer for everyone else. But if we don't enforce these rules, then there's no point having them. They're a nonsense. So we need this kind of an accountability structure that says laws come in, but the state is increasingly unable to police and enforce the laws. So we need to shift the cultural norms that say, as a society, we're all nudging each other. As a peer community, as a tribe, as a herd, we're going, oh, look at them. They're not following the rules. Let's kind of kick them out. They're not going to get invited to our party because we don't like them, because they're not playing nice for the benefit of all of us. So we kind of got to, shift these changes, but it takes time. And
that, and also you said on the one hand, the enforcement, raising the enforcement effort, and also on the other hand, where do you put your enforcement efforts? Thinking of tax evasion. Like if I, as a little entrepreneur, manage to give my tax statement in time, that'll be up my ass in no time. But then on the other hand, we're hearing stories about companies and very wealthy people moving their money around, or being just by the sheer power that they are said to have in the system, being able to bend the rules as they want to. So where do we put those enforcement efforts that we already, I'm not saying that there are enough tax, I'm not quite sure how they're called, people who work in the tax offices, the government tax offices. I'm not saying that there are enough people there. They probably also need to stock up. But what do these people that we have right now focus on?
And they're focusing on what they've been told to focus on.
Exactly. Yeah.
And they're following the rules down when it comes to the top. But again, we can be clever. And there's in London, the borough of Newnham, I think it is. So a few years ago, Newnham Council said, there's budget cuts coming in. So local authorities no longer receive as much money from central government to maintain the quality of life and services in their areas as they used to. We're having trouble raising more funds to replace that. So what can we do to try and reconcile this? One of the things that Newnham Council have done is they've said, well, we have laws that we've never really enforced. We have laws to do with renting. If you're a private landlord and you are legally required to make sure the homes you are renting out to people in our area are of a certain standard. And if they're not, we can fine you to force that behavior change. So we as a council can't can't make more housing. We as a council can't help you reduce your rent bill, but we as a council could help you make sure that what you're paying for, you're getting what you should be paying for. That the home you're living in is actually safe and secure. and that you feel, because we can use these laws, we can enforce it. So it's a small change that just clever use of, every council has these laws, but they're all using them differently. They're levers to pull on, which we can only pull on so many levers at once. So you have to kind of do this mapping thing of saying, what's the most important thing for us at the moment? What will have the biggest change with the resources we've got? And what can we start to see and measure quickly to give us that feedback loop that we're on the right track with this, to give us the encouragement, to give us the permission to try the next big thing, the next bigger thing, the next bigger thing, to create these bigger changes. But it needs people who, in terms of that authority, someone willing to be unpopular and say, we're not going to upset all the private landlords. Well, why do you want to do that for? They'll go on at us, they'll be awful, because we're not here to support local private landlords. We're here to support residents. We have to remind ourselves what's actually important. We've got into habits. We've got into cultural norms. This is how we do it. This is how we've always done it. And every so often we have to stop and have that big shake up and say, let's just reset. Just kind of and that's uncomfortable. People are going to be upset by that. Not everyone's going to get along. But it's a playground rule. We're changing the rules of the playground. So let's have it as an open conversation. Everyone can say, this is how I feel about that. And they can feel safe to do that. And then we'll start to act on it. Everyone feels they had voice, had agency, they've been heard. And we've adapted where we can. And now we're going to progress. But again, think, pause, reflect, plan, get feedback, and then do, and then pause, reflect. Actually, this kind of loops that we go through. Listeners, you can read up more on this, called double loop learning. If you haven't come across it before, really kind of powerful, effective model of reflection that helps you create change and sustain it.
I was just thinking, if when you started talking about the levers people have, if maybe a good or the secret, quote unquote, is a good mix of doubt and permission, asking why at the same time, why not? Asking yourself, is it really the decent thing to do? At the same time, saying, okay, how far can we take this? And how can we find a balance? Where can we find the middle ground between this is the decent thing to do, and to get there, we have to break the rules or change the rules. Maybe we don't even have to break them. Maybe we just have to change them, apply them, enforce them, all of those things that we just talked about.
So there's a kind of a motto that's used in sociocracy. Sociocracy is kind of a school of thought about governance, decision-making, how people work together. And the motto is good enough for now and safe enough to try. So don't wait for it to be perfect. Just has to be good enough for now. Get a prototype, a minimum viable product, whatever you want to call it. It's just good enough for now. It goes, okay, that gives us something to try. We can try that. That seems okay. And it's safe enough. It's not going to kill anyone. The repercussion, and that sense of people, and that to make it good enough for now means you have to have had conversations internally and externally about what you're trying to achieve. And to make it safe enough means you have to have the same types of conversations about what people are concerned about and scared about, both as practice, as culture, and as operating systems. There's a road here. We can't just kind of put something in because trucks go up and down it every day. Got to make that safe. Okay. I will adapt to that. But I guess that sense of permission, we're not trying to make it perfect. I'm not coming, and I built a degree of, I think Saskia built a degree of humility that says, I'm not saying this answer is the solution. I'm not saying this answer is perfect. I'm not even saying this might be the right answer. I'm just saying this seems okay to try. It's good enough for now. It's safe enough to try. If it doesn't work, we'll go back and rethink it. I'm not proud about this. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But what's, that sense of here's a model. This seems all right. Let's try it. We'll get a feedback loop on it. If it works, great. We'll carry on. We'll build. If it doesn't, we learn, we reflect. We try the next thing. But there's no shame attached then. I think this is the sense of getting back to that feeling of self-doubt, that feeling of pride and relationships, the pack mentality, how we compare. And If it goes wrong, I've lost face. If it goes wrong, I'm embarrassed in front of my colleagues. If it goes wrong, no one will trust me again. But we'll design it as an experiment then. Safe enough to try. Or, it's good enough for now, safe enough to try. That's an experiment. Let's try something. Let's be a mad scientist. People love mad scientists. Go back to the movies. They're great. They have all the fun. Best haircuts too, usually. Anyway. So there's something there about, feeding into that imagination we have. Do you want to be, if you ask anyone in any organization, honestly, do you want to have a go at playing the mad scientist today? And I say, yes, I want to say yes. We all want to do that. It's the playground, isn't it? The child, the 6-year-old.
But it's interesting how most of the people will go with, can I say yes first? Can I afford to say yes? The permission part again.
What will I lose if this doesn't work?
Yeah.
Or if it does work, I could stand to lose if it does work, because actually my position, my department, my budget may be harder for me to justify sustaining it. Well, okay, your budget, your department's there for now. Historically, it's been needed, but just because it's always been there doesn't mean it always needs to be there. For example, I always used to be clean shaven, smooth as a baby's butt was my chin. And that's how it was for decades. And then one time I thought, well, let's see if I grow a beard. Experiment. If it doesn't work, it goes back. And the feedback I've had from people is, you look so much better with a beard. Even my mother says, you look so much better with a beard. So I keep the beard. Now, I've lost something in this change. I've lost a ritual of every morning, the foam, the razor, that moment that was kind of a re-grounding moment, an earthing moment, kind of, I'm just focused on doing this thing, this ritual. I've lost that. It's gone. It's not there anymore. So what I say is, well, what can I replace it with? And, what other practice can I now introduce that I haven't had before that could take its place? And actually, do I still need it? It's okay to let things go. And it picks up, this relates to one of the early ideas I shared about the world is increasingly fragmented and chaotic and complex and scary. We cling to things that we are familiar with because they are familiar, because the world is scary and uncertain. That's panicking. What are we supposed to know? Well, we know this. It's this, and again, this is a huge, crass generalization. If any of the listeners know anyone who has been in a circumstance where they've been trapped in a violent relationship, an abusive relationship, and they've come out of it, one of the friends will always say, why did you stay in it for so long? Why didn't you get out sooner? And the answer is usually because at least I know where I'm at.
If I come out, at least the devil you know.
I don't know what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. At least here, I've got some degree of control because I know what I'm exposing myself to. I know the factors. So there's that sense of, we cling to the familiar. I don't want to lose my department. I don't want to lose my budget. I don't want to lose my job title, because what comes next? If I don't know, I have commitments. I've got to pay the rent. I have to feed the kids. What do I do otherwise? My sense is that actually, if we're open and honest about those conversations with each other, with our colleagues in the thinking stage, because we've got a safe bubble to do them in somehow, actually our colleagues will go, well, you know what, just try it. If it pans out and great and it's brilliant, then you're not going to go anywhere because you're the person who brought this about. We're going to keep you in. You're not going to disappear. Your colleagues won't disappear. We'll just redeploy them. And all those kind of, but this might happen, just gets resolved. All of that doubt, this might happen, just evaporates away because people give you clarity. They give you clarification. This is what would happen. You now know you can do this. That fear of the unknown is dissipated. But to do that takes an act of bravery in front of your colleagues to say, I'm having this thought. What if we try this? Not in the terms of what it would do for the service, but what would it do for me and my team? And then everyone else says, I'm glad Adrian said that, because we've been thinking about trying stuff, but we never, that's what's always held us back. And now we see Adrian openly saying that, then maybe I can say that too. And maybe I can now create this change, or we can, again, just be honest about who we are. Back in the 6-year-olds in the playground. I don't like you. because you've got better hair than me. I don't like you because your mum has a better car than my mum. Oh, I'm sorry about that, but they're our mums. We can still be friends, can't we? Yeah, of course we can. Great, off we go. Just, take out all this artifice we built and this idea that we have to be professional and civilized and have these dances we do. Ritual is important. Protocols are important. But if they get in the way of us being able to be human with each other and have the conversations we need to have, then they're not. We need to sidestep. We need to find ways to break them. We need to create a really powerful opposite moment. So one of the things I do sometimes is I go, well, I play a fool. I come in and I have a deliberately props, whatever it is, because people go, whoa, that's a shock factor. I could never do that. Well, what could you do that would be similar to it? Well, maybe I could wear a monocle. Okay, great. Do that. Start a change. But you need sometimes a big cataclysmic shock moment. Even if it doesn't change anything in the future, at least it creates ripples that allow people to start to think, oh, maybe some of the work I do sometimes is with football supporters trusts. So football clubs, again, very famously a few years ago, went through a cycle where many football clubs were becoming bankrupt. And the fans said, but we don't want to lose our club. So the fans and the community came together, poured the bits of money and bought the club. So the clubs are now owned by the fans and the community. And that in turn hasn't changed the way the football is being played. Matches still happen. People still run around kicking a kind of an inflated pig's bladder on the pitch for 90 minutes. Good exercise. Very important kind of social bonding piece. Lots of other things that happen. But off the back of that, all of these people who are now suddenly, I now own my football club. I'm more connected to my community. I'm less likely to move away from the area. So we've built a stronger investment and roots between people in that community. People are now saying, well, what else could I do next? I can own a football. Maybe I could, take on a bit more responsibility. Maybe I could go for that manager's position at work. Because we have this event and it allows people to start go, oh, maybe I could. Well, why not? Because I've got permission now, because I've been part of this, or I've seen that, maybe it's okay. It's not so scary after all.
Of course, I got so many questions that are still unanswered and with things that we haven't gotten into, because not every question needs to be answered. But I also think what you just said leaves the listeners with a bit of a homework there. So let's leave them up with that and maybe do a second or a continuation to this at some point. I would be open to that. I'd love that because it was a really excellent conversation. Thank you for guiding us through everything that is roaming around in your head. Thank you for guiding us through your book in a bit.
And I still have other props that I could share on camera as well yet.
Yeah.
You've seen the big sunglasses. There's other toys yet that can still be shared.
There's room for growth there. So thank you very much for being here, Adrian. It was a blast. I really enjoyed our time together and how you led us through everything and how we just played back and forth with things. It was a really excellent conversation. If people now want to have an equally cool conversation or even see more props in a one-on-one, how can they reach you?
I'm quite messy online. Just stick my name, Adrian Ashton, into Google or Bing or your favorite social media channel, except for Tinder, Grindr, and Snapchat. I'm not on those. I'll usually pop up quite quickly. Feel free to reach out to me. There's a web form, there's kind of messaging things on different platforms. I always say to people, I'm always happy to have an initial conversation without charge, expectation, obligation, anything like that, just as we've done today, just to say, because it allows the universe to create moments of serendipity for ourselves, for other people. And that's important in terms of keeping things growing and spreading out there. Otherwise, there may be links that you can find in this podcast series. I'm not quite sure how that works at things. So if we have a comments thing, we'll put something in there. But otherwise, just kind of reach out or say to someone else, I listened to this podcast thing today. And I'm now, this person came up with this completely bonkers idea. But do you think it's bonkers? Just spread one thing. Share one thing you've heard in this conversation with someone else. Can be anyone. And just see where it takes you.
That is excellent advice that I can only underline and say, get this conversation out and continue it in your private spaces or your public spaces.
As long as they
whoever-
are safe spaces.
Yes. Yes. Thank you for the addition. Great. So again, thank you very much. I had a wonderful time, and I'm looking forward to talking to you sometime soon again. Without the recording button or with the recording button, we'll figure that out as we go. And until then, see ya. Bye.
Thanks everyone for listening.
Thanks for being a part of this conversation with My Future Skills. The show is hosted and produced by me, Saskia Listle. Music for the show is by Music Unlimited. If you want to find out more or hear previous episodes, you can go to conversationswithmyfutureskills.com. You can also download this episode on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. If you're enjoying the show, please rate and review it, as it helps other listeners finding it. Hear you next time.
A rich man's